Are these late season reasonable results for the Cincinnati Bengals defense anything real to talk about or just a mirage? Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We are Locked On Bengals here on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Welcome back to those of you who make us your first listen. We appreciate the regular listening habits from all of you and the everydayers out there. And if you're new to the show, welcome to Locked On Bengals, where you won't miss anything going on with the Cincinnati Bengals, as we've got you covered. And you can subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode. Today, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the defense, from the coaching staff to some individual players, as we try to make sense of some late season results. And something that we've talked about a lot over the last few weeks is that the schedule eases up down the stretch, and we could see something that looks like a defensive recovery late in the season. But for those of you that have been watching every day, you know that we're not fully buying it. We're going to break that down today in an episode brought to you by PrizePicks, where you will get $50 instantly to play with when you play your first $5 at prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl. James, we're going to tackle this defense in a mailbag format today. The first question of that mailbag coming from the Begelman brothers on Twitter. And he asks if we're witnessing the dreaded dead cat bounce. Calls it dreaded, notably, on defense. Is it probable, even after these results, that they still make wholesale changes on the defensive side of the staff?
Yes. Likely. It's very likely that they make changes. Now, you never say never. I've witnessed Marvin Lewis come back from the dead, literally. Like he when you think back to that Minnesota Vikings game where the report came out that Marvin wasn't going to return right before that game in 2016, 17, one of those years. I think it was 17. 16 would have been too soon. So 17. And then he ended up returning. So you never truly know. But I think we know here. Like, I think Lou faces a really uphill climb. I think this defense in general does. And even the other day against Tennessee, you're seeing some of the same issues. And when you see the tackling issues and you combine that with the player development stuff, I think we're going to see significant changes on defense. Now, could that change? Like I said, never say never, but I'm expecting it at this point.
They've played a lot of the worst offenses in the NFL. In fact, they've played all of the worst offenses in the NFL this year. Incidentally, the sixth worst scoring offenses in the NFL this year were the New York Giants, the New England Patriots, the Cleveland Browns, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Carolina Panthers, and the Tennessee Titans. The Bengals have played
5-1 against them. They should be 6-0.
each of those teams. And if you were to look just at the box scores, without diving too deep, at all of the teams that they've played this year for their best defensive performances, they gave up 16 to the Patriots. They gave up 24 to the Panthers. They gave up 7 to the Giants in their best scoring performance of the season. They gave up 14 to the Browns. They gave up 24 to the Raiders. And they gave up 27, one of those being a garbage time touchdown. They had some short fields to deal with against the Titans. So probably their best games of the season defensively. Their only quote-unquote acceptable, to me, results-wise performances of the season on defense came against the 6 worst offenses in the NFL. I don't think you can ignore that. Yes, any given Sunday, yes, it's always hard. There's always professionals on the other side of the ball. You can always have a Mike White game, even when your defense is average. But the teams where they've gotten solid performances, you could throw Dallas into the mix too if you want. They're playing Cooper Rush at that point in the season. They haven't showed up against a single starting level quarterback. Against the starting level quarterbacks, they're giving up 44 points or 34 points or 35 points or 37 points or 41 points or 38 points. And that disparity of results, to me, if I'm making the decisions, James, is enough to say you can't show up against the good teams, the good quarterbacks, and that's a significant problem, not to even mention the development stuff that we've talked about and some of those issues that I think go into it as well.
Well, yeah, of course it's both. It's a big so they're 2-7 in one score games, and if they could develop insert player, well, maybe that player closes out that game, and instead that doesn't happen, and so it's gone hand in hand. And yeah, it's a bad defense. Now, the path, and we did the playoff path yesterday. Feel free to check that out after you finish this show. But if they're going to win out, just that part of it, I do think the defense is going to have to show up and play reasonably well. And you might laugh at the idea because it's going to be Dorian Thompson-Robinson on Sunday against the Browns. But Bo Nix isn't some crappy quarterback. Now, he's not great, but he's not crappy. And so can you take a step forward there where what we feel good about some of these guys? I do wonder. But on the big picture, the holistic picture, let's talk about Lou. For Lou to save his job, I think they need to somehow get into the playoffs. And he needs to be able to face Josh Allen. And he needs to be able to face Patrick Mahomes and show that he can put on that clinic. And then I still don't know. Like, I think it is there because there's been such a disconnect or not seeing eye to eye with some of these guys. And that's why it hasn't worked until, like, for Dax Hill, until year 3, when he finally gets a shot at corner. And then it's like, oh, well, this could work. Then, of course, he gets hurt. But the Cam Taylor-Britt regression and back of, like, it's one of those things where the development side plus the results make it really hard for Lou to climb up Everest and keep his job. I think that's where it's at. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just the vibe I get.
Yeah, I mean, if they make the playoffs, then I think things probably could change. I would have a hard time imagining in that scenario any coaches getting fired, actually. Like, if they actually make the playoffs,
If they make the playoffs, coaches are still fired.
I would be surprised.
Okay. So all right. So there you go. So then so you would buy the bounce if they beat the Browns, Broncos,
I would
and
not
then
buy.
the Steelers.
I think that the Bengals ownership would buy. I mean, have we seen?
And that's the wild card. That's the Marvin thing I mentioned. You know,
have we seen them fire coaches after a playoff run? No, not to my knowledge.
I'm sure they might have, but how do they do it? Does Josh Allen hang 50 on them like everybody said this week? Like, even if they get in,
I guess the playoff result could matter.
Yeah.
But if they end up sneaking into the playoffs, the way that I imagine things working with Bengals ownership and the Bengals decision makers is that they would be reluctant to make changes at that point.
Yeah,
I think if they miss the playoffs, that's a clear we fell far short of expectations this year. Even if they make the playoffs and they get blown out in the first game, maybe they still have that conversation. Like, this is not what we talked about doing this year. But if they make the playoffs and they lose a one-score game, I don't know. I could see the Bengals coaching or the Bengals front office getting cold feet about making any moves there.
Yeah, I think there will be some regardless.
Maybe some.
Maybe it saves Lou.
Yeah.
Because there's obvious deficient. Like, if they make it, it will be in spite of things, not because of things. Because
it could be some positional coaches in that scenario.
So who knows? I do think that they'll take the entire picture, to your point.
I hope so.
And the entire picture is 2-7 in one-score games. We'll see if that changes. Sunday should not be a one-score game. My expectation is that it is not. It better not be, as they try to sweep Cleveland. But we should dive into some of these players as far as bouncing back during this final 5-game stretch. The Bengals have won 2 straight. Are we buying into any of these players playing better? We'll get into that coming up next.
This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by FanDuel, where you can get into the NFL action with America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, if you're a new FanDuel customer, If you win your first $5 bet, you will get $150 in bonus bets to play with the FanDuel Sportsbook app that gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So whether it's the Bengals as 7.5-point favorites against the Cleveland Browns this week in the game James just said he expects to be a multi-possession win for the Bengals, or it's a hunch in the middle of the game where you can check out the latest stats and live play-by-play on the same page where you place your bets in the FanDuel Sportsbook app. You get everything you need with FanDuel. You can check it all out today at FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
It is that time of year. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. And that leads into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max.
I'll say this as we transition our conversation to some of the players on the defensive side of the ball, James. It's still crazy to me how quickly this defense just evaporated from a year-to-year perspective. Like, I know that we've talked about how they got here quite a bit from players they didn't choose to keep and players they've drafted or players they've signed in free agency not quite making the impact that they needed them to. But for Lou Anarumo to go from hot defensive coordinator, top head coaching candidate, very respected around national media, and he still is, I think, to the results they've gotten on that side of the ball this year. When I take a step back and just think about the year-to-year transition and the disparity from last year to this year, not that it was great last year, but they were at least competent. It wasn't always painful to watch. And the playoff performances to this year, where when the Bengals don't have the ball, it's like, looking through your fingers, watching the TV, it's painful to watch. I just am taken aback by that every time I think about just how significant the drop-off has been.
Yeah, I think Lou probably entered this season, 4 months ago and was thinking head coach, like thinking, all right, this is going to be where I take a step forward. Hopefully we're contending for a Super Bowl, and then I become a head coach. And the thing that's most surprising about this year for me is the fact that not that they got off to this, poor start or that some of these guys didn't develop. Like, we had our questions, but even when they struggled, let's say against the Commanders, I thought Lou would figure it out some and like find the mad scientist, like find the right solution to where maybe they don't hold up against all these quarterbacks, but they fare pretty well against some of them. And they just haven't, right? They just haven't. Like, Justin Herbert kicks their butt in a must-win game in the entire first half. And it's just too big of a hole with some other stuff, but it's just something that you didn't expect. I expected that to change, and it just didn't. And it doesn't mean Lou won't be a DC. Maybe he does. Maybe he does return. I'm not completely dismissing that. I do think, though, if the season ended today, we know the answer to that. But there's still 3 games left, maybe more left. But that's my biggest shock is that, I mean, have we ever, in maybe the final 3 weeks, it'll feel like he figured it out. But I still feel like it's a science problem or experiment, and it's just never come together. And this is the mad scientist that always puts it together and finds a way, and he hasn't this year.
Yeah, that's been the consistent issue on that side of the ball. Before we dive back into the questions, we also have some information about the schedule, James, for week 17 that we wanted to touch on this week. That TBD flex game against the Denver Broncos at Paycor will be on Saturday. What day is that? That would be a short week for the Bengals, December 28th.
Yep, December 28th, 4:30 p.m. I love it. I love it. Here's why I love it, Jake. The other two options, based on what I heard, were either Sunday night football or Saturday night football. It wasn't like it was going to be a 1 o'clock. They were not going to let us do that. I would have loved the 1 o'clock, but if it's another night game or a 4:30 game, give me the 4:30 game all day long. And all I'm hoping for, Jake, is that game matters. I want that game to matter. And so that means the Broncos need to lose on Thursday night and the Bengals need to win on Sunday.
Interesting rest disparity in this game. Now it becomes a short week for the Bengals. The Broncos will be coming off a mini bye. We talked about this a few weeks ago when the Broncos-Chargers game got moved to Thursday night football this week, where the Browns and Bengals were originally slated. And I believe the Browns-Bengals game has also changed networks this week. It's gone to CBS from Fox. So a lot of movement as the networks try to figure out who wants to take this second Bengals-Browns game this year. It's just a little bit comedic to me.
Yeah, it is for sure. And I will say this, though, with Joe's knee, obviously he played pretty darn well the other day and moved well. I think it's a blessing for him to not have to go short week, given that he is dealing with that knee. Like, he came out of it fine, but I know it's sore. And so just giving him a few extra days is going to be good, I think.
Yeah, and it's still a 1 day shorter week. Anyway, let's dive back into the mailbag here, James. Let's tackle one of these questions about defensive players before we get to the rest to finish the show. And let's go to Mobster. Cincy Mobster has a question for you about your guy, Tycen Anderson. What's preventing Tycen Anderson from earning defensive snaps, James?
I don't know, Lou. What's preventing him from earning the defensive snaps? Yes, it's a great question. It really is. I think, especially, and even now, honestly, and Geno Stone's playing better, and so I think you keep him on the field some. But is there a scenario where Tycen could be better at tackling than insert whoever? Like your best tackler is probably Logan Wilson, right? Okay, so he's out for the year, and so now what? And to me, like Jermaine Pratt is routinely missing tackles, like we see it. Can you do the 3 safety sets? Does it have to be Vaughn? Could it be Tycen? Because Tyson's the best athlete you have in that safety room. So I don't know. I would love to get him some snaps. I think he's ready to go, but Lou obviously feels otherwise. The Bengals coaching staff feels differently.
Yeah, it seems like he's just buried in that safety room where they're getting a bunch of defensive backs on the field like Marco Wilson, DJ Ivey, but Tycen Anderson is still just a special teams ace for some reason and can't.
And he's awesome there.
Yeah, I'm not saying that as a disparaging label. I'm just saying, like, you can't shake that. It's like he's been typecast, like how Keanu Reeves is John Wick now, or maybe that's a bad example. I'm trying to think of an actor that gets typecast all the time, and that's the one that came into my mind. But he's typecast as a special teams ace who isn't a contributor on the defensive side of the ball. But when we've seen him in the preseason, we've seen him play at a pretty reasonable level at safety. And like you said, he's got the athletic tools. I guess they want to keep Geno Stone and Jordan Battle on the field as much as possible, but you're still seeing a little bit of Von Bell too in these games. I would understand if it was like 100% Geno Stone and Jordan Battle, and they're trying to see, like, can this safety tandem get it together and show that they can be a safety tandem for next year. But at the same time, and maybe they think that's their best chance to win this year too. At the same time, at some point, like, you're getting all these other guys on the field on defense. But Tycen Anderson, how many defensive snaps does he even have this year? I would not be surprised if you couldn't count them on.
It might be 0. Are we sure it's not 0?
I'm trying to check right now.
Yeah,
we'll
check.
See if I get there.
My bet is 0.
He has 1.
There you go.
But I don't think that's a real defensive snap. I'm pretty sure that's a fake punt that was charted as a defensive snap by Pro Football Focus.
Told you.
Because so does Charlie Jones have a defensive snap and Travion Williams. I'm pretty sure that's a fake punt. Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly. When did they fake a punt? Oh, no. Fake punt. They went up against a fake punt. Yeah.
Yeah, defending a fake punt.
Yep, got it now. Yeah, because Charlie Jones is definitely not in on that. So, yeah. Sorry, Cincy Mobster. I wish we had a better answer. I would play Tycen at least some. We'll see. Maybe Geno Stone keeps racking up interceptions and Jordan Battle holds onto the ball for another yard next time. And if they do those things, can't really complain either, because they have played a bit better this week. We have more on this defense, on these players. We will get into it coming up next.
This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, PrizePicks makes your holidays bigger and brighter. You can win up to 1,000 times your money. That is a very big multiplier with PrizePicks. And this holiday season, they're giving away more than $30 million in rewards during Picksmas, offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 weeks. I'm looking at PrizePicks right now, and Jamar Chase, the point is set at 87.5 receiving yards. If you'll think he'll have more or less than 87.5 receiving yards, you can make your pick with PrizePicks. And just in his last 3 games, Jamar has beaten that number. So maybe you like him to do that again against the Cleveland Browns secondary. You can get all of that at prizepicks.com. You can get it in the PrizePicks app as well, where you can use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly with your first $5 play with PrizePicks. Run your game.
Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon.
All right, James, we've got several players to talk about here, and a big question for some Bengals fans today is around Geno Stone's future. Sarah Null and Tom Cole both asking questions about defensive players and calling out Geno Stone specifically. Tom asking, is Geno Stone making a case for a year or two in his past couple of games of performances? And Sarah asking similarly, are some defensive players like Geno Stone and Cam Taylor-Britt, et cetera, doing enough to earn roster spots for the future? And Sarah's wondering if flashing against bad quarterbacks might cause that recency bias when folks look back in that Bengals front office at the way the Bengals defense finished the season this offseason.
Yeah, I think let's start with Geno Stone. He's certainly making that case. And that doesn't mean it's there yet. Well, if you're Geno Stone, you have to realize that you're auditioning for the Bengals and Lou Anarumo and whatever defensive coordinator comes in if Lou is no longer here. So there's a lot of moving parts, at least potential moving parts. But I think he's helped his cause over the past few weeks. It does matter. Playing well matters. We hadn't even seen him do what he's done over the past few weeks. And so early in the season. And so he's up to 3 interceptions, had the touchdown, and 4 passes defensed. What does he do over the next 3 weeks? Does he come up big in one of these one score spots? Maybe it's Bengals Broncos Saturday night, 7:30 Eastern. Bo Nix is driving downfield for the game-winning score and 22 steps in front of it. Like, that matters. So I think what seemed as an obvious decision is now all right, well, let's see how the final 3 weeks go. And so we'll see. I don't want to completely make him cut because I think there's a lot of moving parts there. But it still doesn't feel great. It's not like I'm like, fully in on the Geno Stone experience, but I'm not all the way out either, is how I would describe it at this point.
Yeah, if we were talking about like a 4-week stretch at the beginning of the season where there were some consistent issues, then okay. That's not really what we're talking about. Like, a lot of his worst performances came in the last 5 weeks of the season. Most recently, he had 2 of his better games in that stretch as well. Maybe 3 of his better games, if you trust Lou Anarumo, saying that one of his best games of the season, what was it? The Chargers game or something. It wasn't a game that looked noteworthy to us on the outside. But then the last couple of games, he has interceptions. And one of those was a good play. He did his job as a cut safety, as Brian Callahan pointed out in his post-game press conference, saying that they had a play call designed to beat the cut safety that they were expecting to get on that play, and Will Levis threw it to the cut safety. So sorry to Brian Callahan for your quarterback there. But if he continues to make plays on the stretch, great. But the tackling issue has still been there throughout the season. The angles and those sorts of things, just missing tackles at times, are still there for Geno Stone. But if Lou Anarumo does enough to keep his job, that could very well be Geno Stone keeping his job as well. If it's a new DC, I think the path for Geno Stone's return is a much muddier picture, where if they do overhaul the defensive staff, you might see much more significant personnel changes on that side of the ball. And I think that could apply potentially to Cam Taylor-Britt as well. Now, Cam Taylor-Britt is on the roster next year. He's under contract. He's on a rookie deal. He'll still be around. But the degree to which he has equity with whatever coaching staff is coaching the defense and is competing for starting jobs with DJ Turner, and we'll see about Dax Hill's health, and we'll see about whether they bring in any other players at cornerback or in the secondary, either through the draft or through free agency in the offseason. That, I think, is also TBD and also changes based on whether or not Lou's there, because I think there is still equity from Cam Taylor-Britt with Lou Anarumo and that coaching staff. But especially with the way he's played recently, if you trust PFF, his grading overall this season now in line with his last few seasons, because his last 3 games, according to PFF, like I said, have been good games. And he had that standout game against Kansas City back in week 2. So if he can finish the season strong, I think that helps him a lot, because the Bengals really were hoping he would break out in a big way this year.
Sure. And it aligns with the development stuff, and why I think it's an uphill climb for some of these defensive coaches rather. But it's one of those things where if you change coordinators, it isn't guaranteed that he'll be back. And that's why he's got to continue to impress, much like Geno Stone. Now, it's more likely, because he's on a rookie deal, that he's back. You don't have to earn that second year. And Geno Stone's contract is set up very much so to where it's like, oh, you better earn that year too. And so the Bengals did that one right when you talk about contracts, because you can get out of it if you're the Bengals. But when it comes to Cam, I think he has showed some promise, and I just think it's about maturing and know you got to do the right things to be consistent every single day. And that's it. I mean, the mistakes he's made this year, a lot of them we know he's capable of not making. Like, we've seen him play the past few weeks. Like, I think he's capable of being a solid player. And so maybe that means he's in a bench role next year and in a reserve role. Maybe not. But I do think that he's playing a bit better, and I expect he's going to get tested. Jerry Jeudy's going to probably test him. And heck, Cedric Tillman, and then you go next week to Denver. Like, there's going to be some receivers he's going to face. They can't be running free and wide open like they were earlier in the year when he was facing guys that we weren't expecting. I mean, think about it. Deontay Johnson crushed him in Carolina. And so you can't let that stuff happen consistently. And so we'll see how he does down the stretch.
And now can't get on the field.
That's a whole weird thing. Thing over there.
There's some other players on this defense, I think, in similar positions, like Joseph Osai playing for his future, whether with the Bengals or other teams. But those are definitely the big ones, I think. Geno Stone lead among them. And then there are questions about Sheldon Rankins as well, who hasn't had a chance to bounce back from what has been a very disappointing season, because he's been missing with illness since week 10. And Christian Pollard was asking about that and wonders why he's not active for depth. There's speculation that he's not actually sick, but there's no conspiracy here, James, right? This is just a serious illness that they're trying to get him healthy from, and until he's healthy and back in shape, he's not going to be on the field.
Yeah, it's that simple. And so I know people roll their eyes and think that there's more to it, but he's working his way through an illness. They're hoping to get him back this season as of recording this. So that's Tuesday at 1 Eastern. And we'll see. We'll see what happens with him. But hopefully they could certainly use him. I will say that they could certainly use him, even if it's for a few snaps. So we'll see if he can get back on the field in the near future. But yeah, I mean, we kind of know what's going to happen to him this offseason, regardless of the final stretch. But it would be nice for him to get out there and maybe show a little bit, because he hasn't done anything this year.
Yeah, there's just, I think, too much of a gap from salary to performance for Rankins, who will be entering his age 31 season next year. The Bengals would save $9.5 million against the cap if they choose to make Sheldon Rankins a cap casualty. There's only a $2 million dead hit there. They're saving almost $9 million in cash as well, or maybe even more. It might be pretty close to $10 million in cash. And based on the way he's played this year, I can't imagine that they're interested in bringing him back at that price. And it's too bad, because maybe if he doesn't get sick, he does manage to put together a late season surge for 8 weeks instead of potentially, even if he gets back this week, which I don't think we're expecting, instead of at best 3 weeks. It's just not enough time for Rankins. And so tough year for him, and the illness on top of it is definitely adding some insult to injury, or injury to insult, or however you would phrase that for Rankins. But that's going to do it for this episode, James, of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We're back tomorrow with Locked On Browns for a crossover as we get ready for the Browns' visit to Cincinnati. That'll be next on Locked On Bengals. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode. Hoo day, and have a good one.